If you thought homeschooling at home was tricky, imagine taking your homeschooling adventures all around the world. This is the Ex-Homeschoolers Club, and I'm your host, Jacob Gooden. If you're new here, this is where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of growing up a homeschool kid. And if you're not new here, if you're a returning viewer, guest, audience member, welcome back. We love having you. Before I get into it, just a quick reminder. If you're not on the email newsletter, jump on that, okay? Top link down below. Get on the newsletter. I only send it out once every 2 weeks or once every week. And it's just things about the latest episode, things I'm reading, a little bit of homeschool news, all that kind of fun stuff. But enough of that. Let's get into our guest. Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Robin, aka BG Barnstormer. And we're going to talk all things about taking your homeschool kids on the road and traveling the world with them. Robin is a homeschool mom, or was a homeschool mom, so she's kind of also an ex-homeschooler in a lot of ways, and she did just that. So, without further ado, Robin, welcome to the Ex-Homeschoolers Club.
Jacob, thank you so much for having me today.
Okay, let's get into it. So, I know you've got 3 kids, and currently they are, what, 11, 13, 15, something like that?
Yes, we have one having a birthday soon. So we're calling it 11, 13, 15 because she insists that she's existed for 13 years. So we have this battle every year, but approximately 11, 13, 15.
Okay, yeah. I have a sibling like that too, who's kind of like, I'm actually this. Um, but you started homeschooling about 7 years ago at this point. You did 6 years of homeschooling, and then you've done now like half a year, maybe.
Yeah, so it was 2018 when we started homeschooling, and we homeschooled exclusively until 2024-ish. So however many years that is.
Well, walk me through that thought process of like, okay, let's homeschool the kids.
Yeah.
Let's take things away from the public school system, I guess.
Well, and honestly, it was an interesting dynamic. I had wanted to homeschool for a while, but the long story short, I had some health issues when the kids were little, and so I had a lot of fatigue. And my husband had a rotating schedule. He's in aviation, so whether he was working in an office job at a simulator place, or whether he was a week on, week off, or his schedule rotated in other ways, we thought about it early on, but then we did not actually kind of take that plunge into homeschooling until May of 2018 when we moved from Kansas to Virginia. And at that point in time, he had gone to a regional airline and his schedule was going to be very dynamic. And what I mean is he had 8 days off a month, but those 8 days off were what I like to call 8-ish days off a month. So let's just say he had a Tuesday, Wednesday off, then he would get home Monday night, possibly late, maybe sleep in Tuesday morning, and then we'd have a solid 24 hours before he really had to get back to packing and getting stuff back on, wash the laundry and everything else. So he was really gone roughly 5-6 days at a time and then home. And often his home days were midweek. And so that was one of the biggest things that made us want to start homeschooling, is because if we were going to have any family time, it was going to be on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday. And so we decided pretty early on that, okay, the kids at the time were 4, 6, and 8. And we're like, okay, it's just like you're learning letters and numbers and colors. Like, if I'm terrible at it, there's a school right down the street, and we'll just send them to school. And if we love it, then this will be a really great opportunity for our families. So with a rotating pilot schedule and wanting to have some family time, that was really the first start that kind of put us into the plunge of homeschooling.
No, I totally get the like weird schedule thing. I had roommates at one point, and I live in Nashville, and they do the band touring
Yeah.
thing, and we all ended up with these weird schedules, and so yeah, our weekends would be like you said, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, sometimes, and it was just like really bizarre, and we'd be out in the middle of the week, and people were like, "Why are you drinking on a Tuesday?" And it's like, well, because
'Cause this is
it's
my
our
family.
weekend, guys. But
Yeah.
yeah, obviously you're not taking your kids out drinking, but but I love that you guys were like, okay, look, dad's only going to be available these days of the week. Let's figure out how we can make the kids available those days of the week as well, because I mean, I loved hanging out with my dad when I was a kid. Like, he worked from home at one point, and it was just like, it made the homeschooling dynamic so much more fun. And like, we went and did fun things on those days.
Yeah.
Like, we knew, like, hey, it's our day with dad. We're gonna go to a museum. We're gonna go do like whatever. But walk me through a little bit of like those early homeschool days, because you at this point you're not on the road at this point, right?
No,
You're
we have a
just kind of
stationary
like,
home. The people on the road call it a sticks and bricks home, but we have a stationary home now. And we were on the road full time for 3 years. And now we call ourselves part timers because we travel part time in the RV, sometimes internationally or anywhere in the US, depending on what. Like this last week, my husband wanted to hop up to Canada to see the Northern Lights. I was like, that might be amazing. But this week, we're getting ready to go on another trip in a couple weeks. And I said, I don't think it's probably a good choice for our unit to take a quick trip for 24 to 48 hours, come back, shake up the little snow globe, and then go again. So sometimes we have to be a little strategic. He has quite the wanderlust. And so he's like, hey, we could go to fill in the blank location this weekend. I'm like, okay, we have a soccer game and kiddo
Yeah.
has this going on. So sometimes we have to balance the fun with reality. But yes, we were on the road for 3 years and now we have a stationary home and we travel part-time.
So, with those early years of like getting plugged into the homeschool community, did you build any communities? Did you do the very like traditional like, hey, we're just kind of like, I don't want to say isolating ourselves, but for lack of a better word, like isolating ourselves, like everything's at home, or did you plug into like homeschool communities where you were at?
For us, we did plug in immediately to a community. We actually did, I don't know how many of your people are into different types of communities, but we plugged into a classical conversations community, also known as CC. And we specifically chose that one partially because it was 1 day a week and it was on Tuesday at the time for us. And so the time and the day worked really well for us. I tried to figure out like what type of homeschool mom I was going to be. And I remember doing a ton of research to be like, am I is it called Charlotte Mason? Is that one of them? It's been a while since I've looked them all up.
That's familiar.
I think it's that
Yeah.
one. Or are you this type? Are you this type? Like, I don't know what I am. I just love to learn. I'm a pilot by trade in the background, and so I am not new to teaching. It's just not teaching people in an airplane that are may or may not know what they're doing. Teaching kids color seems a lot less threatening to me. So
Yeah.
we plugged into the CC community because it was a classical approach. And so if you're not familiar with what that means, it basically means if you're learning about, let's just say lobsters, or as the people in Maine say, lobsters, if you're learning about the lobster, um, then we would learn about, what type of animal it is, where does it live, what does it eat, what color is it, anything about it. So my 4-year-old would be like, oh, lobsters could be red or whatever other color. I don't know a ton about lobsters anymore. I haven't studied them in a while. But they could be multiple colors. And then the older ones would be learning more about the scientific, like what genus and species and whatever else that they'd be learning about. And so the idea of a classical approach is you're learning about, generally speaking, like a topic and then learning at whatever level, but everybody's learning the same topic, which was really fun because, I was a new homeschool mom. I didn't have a lot of idea. And the CC community gave us like a 3-year cycle. So one year we would be doing one thing, the next year we would switch to something else. So it gave me really, interestingly enough, like quick plug-in content. And then outside of their curriculum, which again was 1 day a week, we did our reading, writing, and arithmetic. So it kind of gave me like some geography, it gave us some history, it gave us some other stuff. And then we could explore in those topics as much as we really wanted to. So it was a really great, like, I don't know, maybe a rubric or like an outline to say, this is where we're starting, and then we can expand from here. And as a homeschooler, I'm sure sometimes you expand those interests and you get really into other underwater sea creatures and you're like, okay, lobsters are cool, but have you seen the starfish? They can grow back stuff. They're so cool, right?
I kind of relate with that. I didn't do classical conversations. My cousins did. So I have a little bit of familiarity there with it. But I love that, like, but we also kind of got plugged into a homeschool community where my mom was like, okay, at home, I can handle the basic stuff. I know how to teach writing and math and all those different things. Yeah, the three R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Um, and and then yeah, let's kind of like get some help on some of the outside stuff. And so we had our thing was group solutions, and that was every 2 weeks, a single day, very classroom structured.
Yeah.
So it was 3 classes, and you had a lunch break, and
Right.
you had, we were around other kids, and so it gave us some social things.
Yeah.
And as someone who had been public schooled, I was like, this feels like school again. Like
Right.
it was a good fit
Yeah.
at the time. But we got those fun things of like science and
Right.
leaning into something,
Well, and one
and then
thing that's really fun about having a community to plug into is that it's like instant friends who are doing something similar, who are really relating to those struggles, whether you're brand new or your kid is struggling with reading or something else. And for me, that was absolutely critical because if you remember from the beginning, my husband was gone like literally all the time. And so I
yeah,
didn't know anybody. I was in a brand new neighborhood. Not everybody spoke my language. And oftentimes everybody was in public school around us. And so it's not like my kids had a lot of neighborhood friends. They did eventually find some, but in that area, we were just outside DC because we were living near the Dulles airport. A lot of people, both people worked and the kids went to school and then they did after school activities. So they didn't have a lot of what I would call downtime between the school and the dinner or after dinner. And so that was a nice plug-in. And then it also gave me a group of people that were like, oh, hey, your kid is struggling here. Here's some suggestions. Or we use these three. This one was my favorite, but these other two are pretty good too. And so that was a really great resource group as well. And of course, instant friends. Like that was really helpful.
I was gonna say too, because that was like a big thing. My mom talks about that a lot when I had her on the show previously, and she talked about, yes, it's important for like socializing the kids. Like that's what we hear about a lot in the homeschool world. It's like the kids need to be socialized, but also mom and dad also need to be socialized too. So it's
Is
like
it about the kids or is it about the parents? That's the question I have.
that's a good question, but having both is important because to your point, it's like if someone's down the line, right, who's got a kid 2, 3 years older than you, they can kind of help guide you as far as like,
Yeah.
hey, don't go down this path with the curriculum. It's not worth the while.
Really, truly. And I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point, but I've got two kiddos who struggled with reading. And I was given a curriculum, and I really loved it personally. It was like teaching kids to read in 100 easy lessons or something like that. I don't know who the author was. But it was like this book, and it had 100 lessons, and it was short lessons. It was fantastic. It was like literally open, do the lesson, done. It was my kind of curriculum. But what I noticed is about, I don't know, 75 lessons in, my daughter was really struggling with a couple different things, and she slammed the book and she goes, "These are not easy." And I had to laugh because I was like, okay, so obviously there is something going on here that this feels really hard. So then I started looking with my friend who had recommended it, which I love the curriculum. It made it really easy to do. It was a great way to teach it. I said, "Hey, this is a thing. What can I do now?" And she's like, "Oh, hey, yeah, no problem. Let me give you a couple of other suggestions." So that was really helpful because her kids were quite a bit older than mine at the time.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit of like kind of the learning challenges that can kind of come with homeschooling because it's one of the strengths. It's also one of the weaknesses of homeschooling. It's like the strength is like when your kid is struggling, you have the ability to the flexibility and the ability to change and to adapt and find the thing that works for them, and cater things to their learning style. The con is that sometimes those things go unchecked because if you're not a traditionally trained teacher, maybe you don't know the signs to look for of like, okay, hey, this kid is struggling in this area. And so that can go unchecked. Not saying it did in your case, because
Sure.
obviously you guys did some things about it. But like,
Sometimes it's a slower
it,
identification process, for sure.
right? It might just be kind of sometimes they're like, okay, maybe we're just like not getting there. Maybe I'm not doing a good enough job getting us
Right.
to the place we need to be.
Right.
Um, so when did things start? You said you started to realize like, okay, we're 75 lessons in. My daughter is struggling. She's saying it's hard, but also like I'm just realizing she's not picking this up. Like, where was that the trigger to be like, okay, something needs to change here? Or what?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So my middle kiddo, her name is Alice, and my younger one is named Walter. So Alice and Walter both had different reading difficulties. And so it was interesting and hard for both of them. And so when she slammed the book and she goes, "This is not easy," which an average kid who has no general issues with learning something. I mean, my kids are very quick at some things, but some things are going to be harder. Like my son, my 15-year-old just told me the other day, he's like, um, yeah, I'm doing whatever for science and next year is going to be chemistry. And I'm like, okay, so chemistry might be your jam. Maybe this isn't your jam, right? So some kids are going to be quicker at picking things up than others. So my daughter Alice actually started having an interest in learning and reading early. Now, what was interesting is as we were teaching her the vowels and the sounds and all the things, is the way her brain works is she more like picked up words versus just sounding out words, which is not the way most children learn to read. And my friend who was further ahead in the journey than I am in homeschooling was like, "Oh, yeah, well, if they are learning the word philosophy, if they've never seen the word philosophy, they need to know f and then il, ah, and sound it out." But my daughter is interesting because she would pick up words and I'm like, "Okay, let's sound out ran, and and she's like, "It's ran." I'm like, "Okay." So I started noticing things like that. Like she wasn't what I would call on the curriculum trend the way an average kid might be. Now, remember, I say average. There's kids on both ends of the spectrum here. And then my little guy, his issues were different. Like he is now considered dyslexic and dysgraphic, and we may talk about that in a bit. But basically, I noticed in that book, and this is a really great like pro tip for parents who are just starting in reading, is if there's a line below the word and your child can read the word like ran again, then they can, like, their eyes can track and their finger can track. But if there's no line, then it's easier for your eyes to wander if you have a tracking issue. Now, a pro person who is a reading specialist might be like, oh yeah, that's a beginner, totally, I know that. Well, what was interesting I noticed with Walter is when there was no line below the word, he had trouble tracking. And so I was like, okay, let's use a ruler, let's use a thing. And then it progressed to be what I knew was dyslexia, but he would mix up his letters, his P, B and D, P and Q, and then like there was just like more frustration. And I don't know, I call it the pirate A. I don't know what it's called. You know, the A's that have the little hook on top?
Yeah, it's like is it the ampersand or so or
I
something
don't know
like that?
what
It's
it's
kind of like
called. I've never
it's
cared
like
to.
swirly.
Yeah, I've never really cared to look into the name of it. I'm just like, it looks like a pirate. It has a little hook. So I actually wrote a book, and I can share that here at the end of the podcast. But I was very specific in choosing my font because when I have children who are learning to read and they don't know the pirate A versus the regular A, and then if you know the I versus capital I with like the little lines on top and bottom, versus with no lines on top and bottom. And if the kid's already struggling with reading and they are having to spend so much mental, emotional energy figuring out, is that an I or is that an L? What is that letter? Okay, the G has a little swirly, but that doesn't look like a regular G. I started to see some of those types of things. And so my best advice, knowing what I know now, would be if you have questions or struggles with reading, pull in a specialist early and have an evaluation done. We were on the road, and this was actually during the time of COVID, so between 2020 and 2023. And if anybody out there is like, oh, girl, I hear you. I remember that time. There was a lot of hard and difficulties for everybody during that time. And so it wasn't like I could just go to a reading specialist, and everybody was so like inundated with being overwhelmed with the pandemic at that time. Like things were just chaotic. And so during that time, it was like, okay, have we made progress? And so I started really seeing like, are we making progress? And can I figure out what is the problem? Like, is it just the letters? Is there, again, dyslexia going on? Is there something else? And so my daughter Alice, when we were figuring out with her, we did end up finishing the 100 easy lessons, which were a little bit more difficult for her at the end. My younger one, we stopped because we started seeing other things, like I said, with the tracking and some dyslexia. And so we're like, okay, we need to figure out. So we switched to a different curriculum to work on some different stuff. And it did make it easier. But ultimately, we did end up finding a specialist to help us figure out that for my younger guy, it was dyslexia and dysgraphia. And for my older one, still navigating through some of those difficulties because some other stuff came up during that time.
Yeah, as someone who grew up in a house with dyslexic people, I am not dyslexic. So to me, like the tracking, like I have always been kind of
Yeah.
maybe above average when it comes to reading,
Yeah. And some people,
but
it's
it
so
was
easy. And lucky ducky,
right.
lucky little ducky.
Exactly. Like yeah, my mom and I would just read these massive books and like talk about them. And my dad and my sister, who both kind of more struggle with the dyslexia stuff, they would always just be so frustrated because they were like, we love the story. But when you talk about it, they're like, that sounds so interesting. I want to read that,
Right.
whatever. But they could not
Yeah.
do it. And the way that they described looking at a page of words was just like a word jumble. They were just like, it's piecing all these things together, which like I know there's a couple different ways to view dyslexia and things like that, but for them it was just like word jumble craziness. And I was like, I can't imagine reading
Right.
like that. It
Well,
just
and for
doesn't
those
it doesn't compute.
people that do struggle with that, that's when we actually started audiobooks very early. Now, for
Yeah.
me, it was out of desperation as a roughly sometimes solo single pilot mom of my husband was just gone. And at the end of the day, I had been up from 7 in the morning all day long doing all the things. For weeks on end. I mean, this was like a 2-year stint that he was there doing this. And so I was absolutely exhausted at the end of the day. And so we started getting into audiobooks. And so for
Yeah.
kids, whether they have reading difficulties or not, audiobooks are absolutely instrumental in, at least in our journey, because the kids could then pop on their audiobook and they were just so excited to listen because there's tons of information about reading aloud to your kid and all this stuff. And if you're a parent out there who's like, I literally don't have time, or maybe you struggle with reading. I know I have gone through some eye therapy myself and I have 20/20 vision, no issues at all. And there was some other things that were identified after my son Walter ended up going to a reading specialist and then to a vision specialist, which honestly was a little validating because I'm like, I knew my kid was like having trouble, but it wasn't like the normal trouble. He's got great vision, he has no issues, but there was something that was a little bit underlying and something difficult for him. And so the vision specialist was able to help do some different exercises over the period of several months. And then that really helped him improve as well. So, don't be discouraged if your kid is having trouble. Just give them the opportunity to learn in a different way. And that is probably one of my favorite tips is audiobooks are great. They're a great resource. And my kids have listened to dozens. And when we were traveling, we would listen to them in the car as a family. And then it was a great talking point. So they could participate, right, in the story. And then, they're still building vocabulary.
We always make the joke at my house that like we would sit and do school, and my sister and I are 3 years apart. So, but similar to what you were talking about earlier with like kind of having a topic and then we were just at different levels
Right.
going through the same topic together. We would do similar things. And so my mom would sometimes read, whether it's history or whatever, and I would just be sitting there taking notes, very like very traditional school kid,
Very
like just
studious.
like okay, I'm in this.
Fair.
And my sister is over on the other side of the room bouncing on our little trampoline and like annoying the heck out of me. But if she didn't do that, if she didn't have that second activity happening, her brain, it went in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
And so she needed that thing that was gonna lock it in there, and that just so happened. Jumping on the trampoline, knitting, whatever it was. And so to your point, it's just figuring out what is the thing that's gonna get that information locked in your brain. And it
Yeah.
could be audiobooks, could be jumping on trampoline,
Absolutely.
could be any number of things.
Yeah, and I love that you specifically brought that up because my middle daughter Alice is neurodiverse on the autism spectrum. I don't know what the current term is going to be forever, but that is something that we learned, and the term that we learned is called regulation. So if your child is not regulated, learning is pretty much impossible from my experience personally. I mean, I'm not an expert in that, but learning is a lot more difficult.
I think too, one of the other things that I've learned more now, when we got started, because I was 8 when we started as well, and my sister was 5, so she did all the way through homeschool, zero K to 12, and then I did second grade through 12th grade, and jumped a grade in there as well. But one of the things that in the beginning, my mom was really rigid on like we start school at this time and we
Right.
do X, we're gonna do this for an hour and then we're gonna do this for an hour, and
Yeah.
yada yada yada. The day was all planned out. That quickly went out the window because it was just like, this is not how this is going to operate.
I think every homeschool parent is probably laughing right now because they're like,
Yeah.
yeah. I make my
Yeah, and every
coffee
homeschool kid knows that
now.
struggle of like, mom came in with a plan and we said, nah, that's not going to fly. Um,
I think we could do it. You're a music person, right? We can make a little tune. No, 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 that's not gonna fly.
but what was cool was by the time I was exiting high school, my mom had leaned into like, well, when is your brain fully firing?
Yes.
And that's when you're going to do school. And so there was also a bigger level of like, we were responsible for our own schooling at that point just because we were older. There were times where my brain was going at 2 a.m. and she was like, rather than be like, you know what, go to sleep right now. You have to be in bed right now. She was just like, you know what, just do school.
Yeah.
I don't really care. And then, yeah, you're going to sleep till noon tomorrow, but like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, it's not that big of a deal because you got it done.
Yeah, and I love that because that's exactly what we've done for our daughter Alice. She is most optimally functional between, let's just say, generally speaking, noon to 10 p.m. I am most optimally functional about 6:37 until roughly 9. So we have had to learn how to be flexible with our schedule. And I think that's another tip to parents is I understand there might be days where you need school done by 2 or whatever that looks like. But like separating out the schoolwork that's like, okay, what is your responsibility? For us, it was your responsibility is writing and maybe math if they could do it independently, depending on what lesson they were on. And then reading, depending on where they are, might have to be done with me. But as far as like other stuff, like, if you're not in a group that does like history and other things together, then, maybe history time can be flexible and in the evening or, 2 in the afternoon. And finding the time that they are most optimally working is ideal. In fact, now, and I'm sure we'll talk about it soon, is we have transitioned into an online public school system, which allows us that flexibility to work around her optimal hours. And she has meetings at certain times that she does need to go to. And some of them she watches on replay because she needs that extra processing time to really absorb the information or hit the pause button while she finds the document to open to take the notes or whatever. But it's been really helpful because if I hadn't have had those 3 years of homeschooling on the road or before, 2 years before we hit the road, so really 5 years in that time period, I probably wouldn't have the complete understanding of how important it is to be flexible and to really teach the kid how to learn. So homeschooling, you're not just learning things, you're teaching them how to learn.
Yeah. I wanted to we've kind of danced around it a little bit, but I want to talk about, so you did roughly 2 years in a home, in a sticks and bricks,
Yep.
and then you were like, now, okay, now we're going out in an RV. So you had already mentioned your husband's kind of got this like wanderlust, always wants to be out traveling the world. It seems like you also kind of have a little bit of that as well. So like, can we talk about that decision, because that's not just a like overnight like, hey, we're gonna buy an RV and just like go, and especially with 3 kids,
Yeah.
like, and we're gonna homeschool them and we're gonna do like, I've been in an RV. It is not big. It's smaller than my apartment, and
200
I
square
live in a
feet.
tiny
Yeah,
apartment.
usually. Yeah.
So so walk me through that decision, and then like a little bit of like what it looked like on the road.
Yeah. It's actually funny. Some people plan for years to go in an RV. We made a decision in a weekend. And that probably sounds a little crazy to some people, but our life changes very rapidly. In aviation, there was a period of time where every 2 years, one or both of us had a different job because aviation can be a roller coaster of an industry. We were looking at this 2 year stint in Oklahoma, or not Oklahoma, sorry. We lived in Oklahoma at one point, but that was in Virginia. We lived a lot of places. We were in Virginia and we knew it was going to be 2 to 3 years. And we said, okay, after that time is up, where are we going to go? Wherever your job is. That's the plan. Well, in September of 2019, he brought up the idea because at that time he had interviewed for an airline and did not get that job at the time. And then he had gone, another couple opportunities were popping up, and we're like, well, this one is in, this state, and this one's in this state, and this one's in this state. And he's like, well, where are we going to live? And so out of the opportunity of not knowing where we were going to be came the idea of, what if we live in an RV? And I'm like, well, I mean, maybe we should look at one. I mean, because he's like, well, if I have to do training and I need a place to stay, then I can have the RV. And then, because some places do or don't provide hotel or accommodations for training. And so that was a big thing. So he's like, if I get hired in, March or February or whatever, you guys will have a couple months here in the Sticks and Bricks home, and then I could have the RV. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that makes some sense. So in September 2019, we went to a local RV store and we looked at RVs. And I'm like, oh, it's basically an apartment on wheels. You got a kitchen, you got a bathroom. I mean, it's a little cozy, but like, we've moved a lot. So at this point for us, it wasn't any really big deal. I had never been camping in an RV. In fact, I can quote myself when I was like, we had first gotten married, and I was like, why in the world would anybody ever want to own one of these, let alone have one, live in one, travel in one? And so, people, the joke is, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans, right? And so I can definitely say I ate my words. And not only did we own an RV, we lived in one for 3 years. We still own an RV, and we love, love RVing. And so for us, after that weekend in September of 2019, we talked about it, and I was like, okay, I mean, I could see it. It's basically going to be 6 to 12 months. We can live in this thing, and then we'll figure out where we're going to be. And so by October, within 2 weeks, we had bought an RV and we started renovating it. It was beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. I don't know if you post pictures, but maybe I can send some pictures for you and share our first RV. It was gorgeous. And yeah, we renovated over the winter and then moved in the spring and hit the road. I believe it was, I'm trying to think if it was March or April of 2020. And as the rest of the world is aware, that is when the pandemic kicked up and everything was crazy and everything was shutting down. And so for us, we actually had we bought like a 2012 model. So it was completely paid off. And we had a perfect little bubble to be in that gave us a bit of security in a time where the world was a little crazy.
So walk me through a little bit of like, how do you homeschool in that type of environment? Because
Okay.
like, I think you brought up like, your oldest kind of like needing to like hum and whistle as they work, and then your middle one
Literally.
being like, bro needs to shut up, like, I cannot focus while that is happening. And so all of a sudden you're in, I'm guessing 40, 45 foot RV,
Yeah,
something
our
like
first one
that,
was
like,
35 foot, and like
okay.
square feet. I'm not going to do the math, but it was somewhere between maybe 2 to 300 square feet. So yeah, yeah. How does
Right,
that work?
that is tight quarters,
Yeah.
and I understand. We have a mutual friend, Patty Hunt, who has the Inspired Travels with Patty podcast too. We've both been on that show, yeah, she always is like, wait, you also have the outside world, that's that becomes part of your living quarters, and I'm like, I understand that, but like, I live with one other person. We live in a 750 square foot apartment. Like during COVID, we wanted to kill each other at times. So,
Right.
I'm like, you fit, another full size human being and three little ones in that
Yeah.
in a space half that size. How do you not strangle
How
yourself?
do
And
we
then
do
also,
it?
how do you be productive and get any schoolwork
Sure.
done at that period?
Yeah. Now, learning in a small environment, we actually got a clam tent. Now we have a gazelle tent just because the clam, were out over time. That was after many years. It was a great, great unit in case anybody has a clam tent. They last a long time. We bought our secondhand because that's what we could afford at the time. But we would set up the tent outside. And so we typically had, we didn't have the words at the time, but they were regulation tools. We had a hammock that had a foldable stand because some RV parks that we went to did not, or had a rule that you couldn't put hammocks on trees. So I think it was like, you can find them at Walmart, Amazon. I think the brand was Ozark Trails from Walmart that we had got our folding hammock stand. It was fantastic. So we actually had the hammock set up out there. And so if you remember, Alice loves to wiggle while she works, not whistle while she works. She wiggles while she works. And so she might be out there hanging out on the hammock, and we would do her math orally outside. She had some struggles. Like, she can write and things like that, but there's something, and we were still figuring out at the time what the connection is between writing and thinking and working. Like, we weren't quite sure what was going on, but we knew math for her, she could do the math. It was just going to be out loud and she could see it visually. But if she had to do the writing while she did it, there was some holdup and we weren't really sure. I'm not an occupational therapist, but I was able to then communicate with the occupational therapist when we started working with one. These are the things that I'm seeing. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's called blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, perfect. You know what that is? Great. We've just always done math orally. So for us, we would separate the kids out into different zones. So one might be outside working on something, one might be in their bunk working on something. And then the little one, he was 6 years old at the time. So he had a lot of playtime. And when the kids were little, I would rotate through the hours of work. So I'd be like, okay, Walter, you're going to be, playing in the bunk room during that time. Theo, you're going to be in my room working. And I actually want to talk about that. I'm going to come back to that. Hold on to that thought with my bedroom. And then Alice, I'll be working with you outside for a little bit and then we'll swap. And then Alice can go work in my bedroom and then Theo can come outside if we have to work on something. So we did a lot of like little like rotation stations, I guess you might call it. And that worked out really well. As far as my bedroom, that was actually recommended to me by actually a therapist at one point. I had questions about going, well, we had worked through some different things in therapy with one of the kids for some different stuff. And the therapist said, okay, with you guys hitting the road, it's going to be really important that everybody has their quiet space, quiet time. So if you need a quiet space, then create a place in the rig where they can get away. I'm like, literally, we have 4 bunks, 2 bunks, 4 bunks. Yeah, two on each side, a living room, and then my bedroom. So what we did is every day I would make my bed and I had like a little quiet, like corner, a little quiet, like a box of things that was like, what like the different types of games. Like you could do like a dot to dot, or you could do like, remember the game Rush Hour with the little cars? It's like a
Yeah,
plastic
I do
game.
remember
Things
that.
like that. Things that would get you out of your emotional brain into your thinking brain. And that's what one of the therapists had recommended. They said, hey, this will be a really great tool. So if people are having big feelings, they can go to your quiet space, your quiet corner, and then they can get out the stuff and then have a little quiet time. And so that was actually instrumental to us as well, is designating a place that people wouldn't be going generally, that they could go be quiet if they needed quiet time. And that was really helpful for us. So if anybody else, and that works really great in a sticks and bricks home too, is we still have a quiet corner where there is a box of stuff that you can go and get, just like a little tub of toys. And they're thinking toys, things that get you into using tactile something. And it's a really great tool. So very regulating.
You know what's crazy is that like even I'm 29. I still do that to this
Yeah.
day. Like I still buy Legos. I still like when I am stuck in the
Yeah.
just like I can't get out of the flywheel of like
Yep.
I have to fix this problem. I have to fix this problem. If I can just turn it off for a
Yep.
second and go do anything
Yeah.
else, journal, do a puzzle,
Yeah.
Sudoku's great. Like
Yeah.
or
Sudoku is
but like
fantastic.
Lego is like so
Yeah.
tactile and I just like
Yeah.
just putting things together, do a little challenge of like build only with a color,
Yeah.
build a ball, build a
Right.
whatever. It your brain will solve the problem
Yeah.
in the back of your head while you're not thinking about it,
Mhm.
and then you'll come back and you're just like fresh new
Right.
eyes, fresh new emotional state, fresh new whatever,
Yeah.
and that just it's like literally the best problem solver I think I've
Right.
ever had. And once I reconnected with that of like toys are great.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, and you alluded to it being like you're in a small space, how do you do it? Is for
Right.
us, we would separate out, different zones or different times and we would rotate through. The other thing is knowing your own limits, and it's going to amplify everything that's unsolved, undealt with. And so basically in a
Right.
small space, having regulation tools to use, and that could be taking a walk outside, sitting in a quiet space. My daughter loves to be cozy, so we have a weighted blanket we put on top of her, and she loves to be cozy under that, and that's very regulating for her. But learning how to regulate your body, I think, has probably been my greatest adventure in my homeschool journey, is because it can be really hard and frustrating when your kid is having a hard time. You don't know how to help them, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to get some resources, but I can't solve this problem today. And then learning how to not only take a deep breath, but like do something that helps your brain really regulate. Some people like the game Candy Crush or whatever. I'm not a big on the electronic. I love the tactile stuff because it does something different in your brain. And I'm not a psychologist, but I know from like our rules at home is when you're frustrated, you remove yourself and you calm down and then you come back and talk about it. So remove yourself, calm down, come back and talk about it. And so if you need to remove yourself from a situation, then you need to go and find something to calm down. And we would use the quiet corner to find something, whether that's writing or coloring or drawing or playing the rush hour game or some other type of thing. And we're always looking for stuff. A lot of science museums, as we would travel, had really cool things. And we're like, hey, that'll go in the quiet corner. That'll be great. And it was fantastic because there was always something new. And at different points, we had like light brights and different, things that we could put the little pieces in a little snappy container. And then the kids could literally just go and pick out their color. And when they get in that thinking brain, it helps to calm down and do other stuff, psychology wise. I'm not the therapist, I just have really great people who know really great things.
Yeah, no, but like you said, I think it just translates to everybody
Yeah.
too. It's just like sometimes you just have to like turn it off for two
Yep.
seconds and go do something that is just totally out of the norm,
Yeah.
and like it gets you in a different place. And breath work can help with that too, just like learning how to regulate your breathing and stuff like that. But it's just you have to get out of the mindset, and that's where we get just stuck.
Yeah.
We get stuck in the repeat and
Yeah.
repeat and repeat, and you're bashing your head against the wall trying to figure this thing out or trying to solve a problem, and it's
Right.
just like this is not working. Like do
Right.
something different, you
I,
know?
I do have to tell parents though, silly putty does not come out of things very well. I don't know what it's made of. It is a table toy for us. So in case you need to know that, silly putty's a table toy. Learn that out on accident.
I wanted to kind of we've kind of brushed on it a little bit of like your kids having their brains are wired a little bit differently.
Sure.
And one of the big fears I know from growing up with my friends who we also all of us were very different. We were a wide variety of kids. We had dyslexia, dyscalculia, we had autism, we had Asperger's. We had just like anything you could imagine. Like in the great thing is it taught me I think a lot of patience for people because I was just like you never know what you're going to get on any given day with any of my friends. But there was also, I think, a lot of fear from parents around getting their kids tested or getting them diagnosed because, and I don't know if it's a failure thing or what, because it's not a failure. It's just your brain is wired differently. It's not a big deal. But like I know that there was a lot of this fear and this not wanting to do that for your kid, and I've always been of the philosophy, and my family has always been of the philosophy, is like once you know what it is, well, then you can actually take steps to like make it better. Or it's not even make it better. It's just you know the tools. You can learn the tools to operate like we've been talking about. And so, what kind of was there a fear for you of like okay, putting a name to some of the things that you were realizing like okay, my kid is not operating the way that I thought they were going to operate? Or were you like, no, like we got to get this, I got to know what is going on here?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I'm glad you brought it up because there's a lot of times where I wondered, should I have quote unquote found out earlier? Should I have done something sooner? And the thing is my all of my kids are general average kids. They're rough and tough. They rumble. They play in the dirt. They do this. They do that. They were just average kids. And I did a ton of babysitting growing up, so I was pretty familiar with different learning phases and stages and things like that. What I noticed is that when my kids were having a hard time, and that's the phrase that I learned from a friend of mine, they said, "Are they giving you a hard time or are they having a hard time?" And I really loved that phrase because it's like my kid doesn't wake up every day thinking, "I'm going to make my mom's life really hard today. I'm going to be a jerk. I'm going to scream and yell and throw tantrums." No, they only usually get to that point when they're having a hard time and they're so overwhelmed they can't physically control their bodies anymore. And so I noticed with Alice that she was having a hard time with a lot of different stuff in different areas. And I'm like, for example, food was one of them, but it wasn't anything she was allergic to. It wasn't, it's like she just really preferred this applesauce brand and this cheese stick brand. And I was like, okay, so we can kind of cater a little bit within reason because, I'm the mom who I cloth diapered, I made my own baby food, I did all the things because I really enjoy that stuff. But at the point where my kiddo started dropping foods, where my kiddo was having not only a hard time with reading, but then other things like that were making learning difficult because food was becoming difficult. So then learning was becoming difficult because if your brain doesn't work, then you can't really learn anything. So I started seeing these things and I'm like, at what point would a diagnosis be helpful? And so for us, we were at the end of our time on the road. And that was actually one of the reasons we got off the road is my husband had a change in his company to a different position internally. And that required us to be stationary in one place. And then also it provided us the opportunity for Alice to get some services and some support and evaluations that we needed. And so my best advice is with food related things, if you're not sure, if you're starting to see food things they can't chew, they're getting really selective, go and find a local place that can help you with food stuff. Because I've spent roughly 5 years figuring out this food thing. And from the age of 5 to 10, Alice started dropping foods. And it was like, oh, I don't like PB&J. Okay, well, you can have ham and cheese. Not a big deal. Kids go through these selective phases. And I love the word selective because they're actually they're selecting their food very strategically. I actually just went to a training last night about selective eating and supporting kids who have food difficulties. And they were talking about their food profile. And I had no idea that there was such a thing because I'm not a food expert. I just really like food. And I discovered that Alice prefers soft food, sometimes crunchy food like pretzels or goldfish. She likes either room temperature or warm foods. And understanding why her food got so selective is because and I've known this, part of it is because she couldn't chew it. But I wouldn't have understood the in-depth point of that issue until much later. Like I didn't realize she had a severe underbite. I didn't realize as she lost her teeth between ages 5 and 10, she wasn't literally able to chew her food, which is why we saw her slowly drop foods. And now I can look back and say, wow, that makes a lot of sense. But at the time, in dropping 1 or 2 foods is not a big deal. Like, okay, you like strawberry yogurt, but not vanilla yogurt. Yeah, you're still eating yogurt. That's pretty good. But I didn't realize at the time how selective she had gotten until we were so far in and she had started to get braces and started to have other things that was a really big piece of our food journey. And she was not actually diagnosed on the autism spectrum until age 11. So if you can imagine, one day I have an average kid, no reason to think anything's unusual. And then the next day it's like, what does this even mean? So had I maybe known more about food stuff and other stuff earlier, I might have been able to get into food therapy with her to be able, like with an occupational therapist, a food specialist, to say, okay, this is what we're looking for. This is how we're going to give you those tools, like we talked about before, to help her continue to progress. Now, the reality is with her severe underbite, which we didn't know at the time, that is like a dental work issue, which we didn't really discover until we started looking into braces. And so it's a multifaceted approach specifically in our situation. But for an average person who doesn't have the food difficulties, who doesn't have some of these other stuff, Alice was also emotionally having I'm going to call them emotional meltdowns more than I thought an average was for her age. And so that's when I started saying that phrase of, are they giving you a hard time or are they having a hard time? And I didn't realize that there was a lot of other sensory overwhelm because I had no reason to believe that her brothers who were loud were a problem. I mean, they're boys. Of course they're loud. When we actually did testing, we discovered that for her specifically, auditory overwhelm was huge. I had no idea. And so if you have thoughts or concerns about your kid, my biggest thing is just to say, go get a test done. Like we did one I don't remember exactly her credentials, but she's some type of doctor of something of another. And we did a full on evaluation, and it was a bit expensive, but at the same time, like having that diagnosis allowed us now to get services that we would not have been eligible for otherwise. And that's probably the biggest reason to or not to get a diagnosis is if, for example, Walter had some speech issues, he could do in-person speech, but because he didn't have the autism diagnosis, he could not do virtual speech. So that can also be, and now I know that's going to continue to change as insurance and COVID is not as much of a thing anymore, but like that is a very difference in having a diagnosis versus not. Walter does not qualify in those same areas that Alice did. And so Alice's needs allowed her to have extra supports and services that Walter will not qualify for because his needs are not in what is now the DSM-5 as the same level of her needs. And so they have to quantify it in some capacity. And so as far as like insurance and like diagnoses and things go, if there is something that your kid is struggling with, that they need help with, that requires some type of specialist, that is where I believe a diagnosis can be really helpful and supportive. And I also completely understand why people don't want to have the diagnosis. But my best suggestion is if you need a specialist, if you need support, get it early because that could be the difference between having the tools and then also going through a lot of extra struggles later. And my best advice is get the tools. Don't make everything a hammer and just smash everything. Get the specialized tool for your specific situation.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I've seen with my friends too. It's just like
Yeah.
there were the families that did it. My family went through some of that. We got diagnosis for different things, and so it was like, and it gave us a name
Yeah.
for what was going on,
Yeah.
which then it gave us the tools because we could then go research that, and that gave us. Now I look at it and I go, it also gives us, as kids, it gave us like agency over our own bodies as well
Yeah.
because we're like we know understand what I'm just wired a little funky
And
or I'm
also
just
language
whatever.
to describe what you need is that sound
Right,
bothers me. Okay, I'm gonna put my headphones on. Cool.
right. I have a friend growing up who he had I believe it was Asperger's. I could be mixing it up,
They
but
don't use the
but
term
anyway, but
now,
he
but
would get.
generally neurodiversity of some sort. Yeah.
Yeah, but he would get very overwhelmed by like having all his friends over. But he loved having us all over.
Yeah.
But we just knew, hey, he's gonna go in the other room.
Sure.
He's gonna go chill, be alone for a while. Sometimes he'd come back and hang out with
Yeah.
us. Sometimes he wouldn't. And his parents were cool. They were just like, hey, you guys are already here. Pizzas are on the way.
Right.
Movies are in the DVD player. Like,
Right.
just do your thing. If he wants to come back out, he'll come back out. Kind
Right.
of a thing.
What great parents to be able to communicate that to other kids because so many kids will internalize that, be like, oh my gosh, I hurt their feelings. Oh my gosh, I upset them. Oh my gosh. And then that energy, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, is like, oh, I don't want to go over to Joe's house because Joe doesn't like me being there. No, Joe loves you being there. They just
Right.
get really overwhelmed. So that's unhealthy.
Exactly. And so it gave us like you said, it gives us the tools, and then the thing is also when you know it, then like you said, you can communicate it to other people and you can educate them on it, and that's where I always tell people I'm like I learned patience at a very young age because like I just knew so many people who had literally any number of things. I
Yeah.
mean, and it was just it it taught me to just be like okay. Sometimes things are going to go really slow. Sometimes things are going to go really fast, and it's okay. Sometimes people are going to get angry for no reason. Some people, and they're going to struggle with their emotions and whatever.
Right.
And so, again, it gave us power over those things in a lot of senses
Right.
because we just knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And so, even now, I have friends who were in our late 20s, early 30s, who are getting diagnosed with stuff, and they're like, "Oh my gosh! Like, for the first time in my life, I feel like I have kind of control a
Yeah.
little bit over like what is going on
Yeah.
with me because I have something." To label it as and now I can do my
Yeah.
research and figure out what I need. And
Yeah.
so I think it's great for your kids that they're going to get to grow up with kind of this like, okay, this is what's going on with me and this is why this bothers me and this doesn't bother me and this is why I act this way. And hopefully they can communicate that with other people
Yeah.
and educate their friends to be like, hey, like I'm a little different. It's all good.
Yeah.
Like, come on this ride with me.
Well, and we need all types of people in the world. People
Yep.
who see things differently than we do. My daughter always says it's like I'm a different operating system. You're whatever, and you're a PC and I'm a Mac. You're this and I'm a that. And it's so interesting because once she had the language to describe to other people that yes, I can do this. I just need to take my time and do it this way. then they would not be frustrated that she was taking longer.
Knowledge is power.
Yes,
That's
it
what I always
is.
say. I want to talk a little bit about now the school journey because
Mhm.
now, so you no longer a homeschool mom, but you guys are doing
Yeah.
on.
They're home,
Some
but
people would class of
I'm not in charge of their
right.
curriculum. So
Right. So
I'm an
not the
if.
traditional homeschool approach of
Correct.
you picking every curriculum. They are now enrolled in public school online, but you guys are still able to travel the world and still kind of do things at your own pace to some degree. So talk to me a little bit about like that decision of what led into that, and then let's talk about like what's coming for
Yeah.
this next year.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So we started their online public school journey in 2024, fall of 24, because that first year of getting back, I was like, we just need a year to kind of like settle in because there's been a lot of changes in our life. And at that point, we had been on the road for 3 years. Now we have a stationary home and figuring out how to settle in. We were in some different therapies with Alice for a period of time, trying to kind of figure out exactly what support she needed. And so we had kind of a transition year to get into the homeschool or to the online school system. So we knew we wanted flexibility. Colorado is, I think they call it a choice state choice school something. Basically, you don't have to go to your neighborhood school. You can choose what school, you can get on their wait list, then they can call you up if you make the list or however their system works. So basically, we looked for an online school that would provide flexibility, and we really wanted something, especially for Alice, that was flexible, that she could sleep in a little bit because we know, and we've always known she does not do mornings well. Even when we've traveled in the airlines or on the road, if we have to be up and gone before 8 a.m., we have to really prep her for that. And we knew that was going to be difficult. So the school that we found is an online school that has 4 days of school a week. And they have basically a checklist that they email you or they have posted in their online area where they have all the different subjects and then they have a list of everything that you do. And this school's been in existence for like 20 plus years. And so we felt really confident that they kind of had it figured out. I know after COVID, there was a lot of like online school and what does that look like? And my oldest had done a different online school. It was Montana Hybrid Academy, which is fantastic, by the way. The thing with that one, though, required him to be in front of a computer so many hours, but there it was a really fun learning environment for him. So there's a lot of different environments and types of learning. That Montana Hybrid was fantastic for that time that we had that like gap year of going into the public online school and trying to figure out what we needed to do. But what we decided for Alice specifically is that wasn't going to be the best learning environment for her because she needed to have frequent breaks. She needed to have certain things that were going to really accommodate her needs. And so the school that we do now, it has that checklist. It is, everything is recorded, of course, for online stuff. But basically, it allowed her to receive special services for not only reading, but some math support that she needed, and then potential other supports as we continue to evaluate what her needs are. And then, same thing with Walter. He was able to get some extra reading support that if we were not in the public online school, we would have to pay for specialist reading. Now, I don't know if any of your listeners have looked at or paid for specialists. They are very expensive and typically weekly or monthly. And now through the public school system, we are able to get some of those services either for free or most of it covered. And then we can do like a reading camp in the summer that is much more affordable than weekly or monthly, paying for those services. And that was really something that was important to us, is to get the services not only as cheaply as possible, affordably as possible, but that public school provides, which is key for a lot of people who need those supports.
Like I mentioned before, like I had family members that have some of those learning things. I've been to the specialist office. I've sat in the waiting
Yeah.
room waiting, and I remember hearing
Yeah.
the bill cost and being like, ooh, that is.
And we did for a period of time during that kind of like gap year while we were figuring out what we needed to do and what was going to be the best for our situation. We did have one. And I remember the specific one that we had found was very rigid in their system. And we're like, we need to have 20 to 30-minute lessons. And they're like, we do 45-minute lessons. I said, can we do them twice a week? And depending on where you go to, depends on what services they provide. But we knew at that time, I don't think we had a diagnosis yet of dyslexia, dysgraphia, or autism officially. But I do remember that we were very sure that what we needed and what was going to be provided needed to be very specific. And so it's great because now with the, like Walter has a reading, I don't know if they call him tutor or specialist. I'm not sure what their their title is, but he has several times a week, short lessons. They work on very specific goals, and they're really fantastic. They love their jobs. They love what they do. They love working with kids. And Walter really enjoys it for the most part as well, and is building a lot of confidence in reading. And if you do have a kid, I think it's called Orton Gillingham or something like that, for dyslexia, dysgraphia. I don't know how it's spelled, but it's like Orton Gillingham or something like that. So if people aren't familiar, that is supposedly one of the best curriculums or methods to teach a kid who is dyslexic or dysgraphic with different stuff. So that is something that we've learned in our journey from getting tutors and specialists, and then now working in the public school system. And I have nothing but praise for the people who are trained in these different things, because I knew when Walter was having trouble with reading early on that there was going to be needing some support, and I could get trained. But I also had Alice who had other difficulties, and I had to kind of decide, am I going to become that specialist? And I think did your mom become a specialist at some point for your sister?
I don't know to what degree. I know she went through some training. I don't know that she was like fully fledged specialist, but she
Right.
definitely knew what she was doing to
Right.
some degree. And so, but yeah, it was one of those things where then my mom had these tools, this tool set
Yeah.
that she was able to then other kids who had dyslexia
Yeah.
could come to our house and be like, okay, let's do a quick lesson, and
So
it could
cool.
be 20 minutes or it could be
Yeah.
45 minutes, or if it was going really well, maybe it was an hour and a half.
Sure.
And so yeah, we did all the like the B's and the P's and the D's and the Q's, like we did the Sharpie on the thing and
Sure.
yeah, all that stuff. So
Which is such a great
um
service to the community if you do become
yeah.
a specialist. I think in my situation, I had Alice who had other difficulties, Walter who had different difficulties. None of them were the same difficulties. And so if you're a parent out there who has kids who have different difficulties, don't be afraid to pull in the support and the support of the troops of other people who are able to take that weight off of you, because the goal is to support the kid, not that you have to do it all.
I also wanted to bring up, so I mean, one of the great things about the fact that you guys are doing the online schooling is you also still get to travel.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you had sent me a whole list of like, hey, here's all the trips like we're planning.
Yeah.
And one of the things when we chatted the other day was also that you were talking about one of the great things about traveling is the experiential learning aspect of
Yes.
it. So, where are you guys going? And what is the learning goal when you guys get there?
Yeah, so this fall we are getting ready for an Australia and New Zealand trip. And we love, love, love experiential learning. That's something that no matter what people's situations are, whether they have a diagnosis or not, it can be super supportive of just creating that memory and locking it in. So, like, my kids remember going to the battlefield and learning about whatever the historical event was. They may not remember all the dates and all the people, but they're going to remember that battlefield, and they are going to remember very vividly how these troops came up this way and these came up from this way. And why did they do that? That was a bad idea. But they didn't know because they had never been there before, right? And so you can read about it in a history book, but once you go experience it, it's a game changer. It really is. I mean, if you have ever been international, I'm just going to pick on like the Eiffel Tower. It is awe-inspiring to look up at and be like, wow, like this is so cool. And so, or like if you go to London and you see Big Ben, which, fun fact, is the name of the bell inside the clock, not the name of the clock. Isn't that interesting?
That is
You
interesting.
learn these fun facts along the way. And so going to the place, hearing, like in the US, you have a lot of national parks, and we've been to a ton of them, like over 100 of them. They're incredible. And doing junior ranger books and things like that. But then when you go to the location, like we're getting ready for New Zealand and Australia, so we're going to go snorkel on the Great Barrier Reef for my daughter's birthday. And that is something that we have studied in the books, but she was so excited. We took like a local snorkeling lesson to like learn all this stuff. And so now they know how to like go down and to clear their masks and all the things. And that's going to be an experience that they're not going to forget. And they might actually build on that. So like, the law of readiness, like I talked about, is when you're ready to learn, you will learn. Like they know the basics, they have the cliff notes, but now they're going to be able to absorb so much more because they're getting the actually hands-on experience. So that'll be a really fun trip. And we've also been starting to listen to podcasts. I think my Theo sent me the other day something about kiwis and invasive species of the islands and lots of different stuff. And so hopefully we'll get to see some koalas while we're over there. And also they eat so many eucalyptus leaves. I'm like, how do they end up so fluffy? I don't know. I think they're just fascinating creatures. So Yeah, we love the hands-on learning. And then it also gives us an opportunity to explore and to question, like, oh, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Why did they do that here? And then that can dive back into history. So it's a multifaceted approach to learning, which makes it really fun because you're questioning everything and you're absorbing everything all at the same time.
I love that. I love that. Oh, I think too when kids have the ability to have like a not typical school experience, we end up learning these really unique
Yeah.
skills
Yeah.
that like it not to say the public school kids don't have that, but it's just but
It's
we have
different.
these opportunities sometimes
Yeah.
to get certain skills that we wouldn't have otherwise, and it can be fun. I
Yeah.
mean, it just me and my buddies, we all owned different. We had different businesses, and we had different skill sets, and we could help each other build cars, or
Right.
someone come over and we, like I loved. I built guitars for a while, like stuff like that. It
Yeah.
was just like just weird stuff we were interested in, and and
Yeah.
there were skills that now we get to look back on and be like,
I
I
like
know how to do that.
I like to talk also about like learning a skill, studying a place, like going to Disneyland, Disney World. And we studied the history of Disney before we went. We made that an experiential learning trip. And then they so much appreciated all that Walt Disney did to create this park to do this thing. So something as simple as going to Disney can be that experience, right? And I think
Yeah.
the fun thing about hands on experiential learning is that everything is a learning opportunity.
With that, I'm gonna give you an opportunity. I know you've got a book,
Yes.
you've got a blog. How can people find you? How can people connect with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my name is Robin. My pen name is BG Barnstormer. And you can find me on my website, www.bgbarnstormer.com. And you can also, I have a blog up there. I don't always update it like weekly or monthly. Right now, I have been pouring into other creative projects, but I do have my book. It's a children's book. It's called Yucky Weather. And on my website, there's a little tab that has my book, and you can find the link there. You can also order it on Amazon or Ingram Spark. And if you're ordering it in the fall of 2025, I do recommend you order on Amazon or Ingram Spark because I will be doing traveling. So I will not be able to give you an autographed copy. If you can wait a little bit longer, I'll be back mid-December and I can send it out hopefully before Christmas. But I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at BG Barnstormer. And in case you're wondering why I have my pen name, B stands for Birdie, and my name is Robin. My brother called me Birdie growing up. And my kids, G is for galleta, which is cookie in Spanish. My kids call me Cookie. It's kind of like an internal family joke, but I love cookies. I love eating cookies and making cookies. And then the Barnstormer is a pilot from the 1920s and 30s that would travel from place to place performing aerial stunts. And they would sleep in a barn. So they were called a barnstormer. And as a pilot, as a traveler, I just feel like BG Barnstormer encompasses all of who I am. So it's kind of a fun play on every aspect of my crazy, awesome life that I live and the adventures every day.
Yeah, go check out everything that Robin just mentioned is going to be linked down below as well. Go check out her book if it's something you're interested in, and her blogs. She's got some wonderful blogs. I'm going to link one that she sent me that talks about her daughter and a conversation that her and her daughter had that I thought was beautiful. And but is there anything I've missed topic wise? Anything that
Oh,
we haven't hit
I
on that you're like
neglected
we
to
got
tell
to
you my
talk?
book. It's called Yucky Weather, and it's about life perspective. It is a bedtime story aimed at ages kids 3 through 8, but it is definitely appropriate for kids of all ages and even adults. And the story is called Yucky Weather because when my kids were little, they were looking outside, literally outside the window in Virginia, and they're like, Mom, it's a yucky day. What are we going to do? And so it actually inspired me to write this book about what you can do on a yucky weather day that you can't do on a sunshiny day. And it's a book about life perspective and enjoying every day, no matter what kind of day it is. So it's a very special book to my heart and inspired for my children. All the characters are inspired for my children as well. And I was very specific. It's actually a seek and find book. You can find a duck and a frog on every single page. I chose a font that was friendly for early readers, especially kids who are dyslexic and dysgraphic, and colors and everything. It's just a very gorgeous book. So please check it out. And thank you so much, Jacob, for the shout out for that.
Of course, yeah. And if you don't have kids like me, you can either buy for yourself or buy for somebody else, or you can also encourage your local libraries to go buy a copy or even buy a copy for your local library
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
that is something we need to support our local libraries.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
all right, Robin, this has been fun. I've really
Yeah.
enjoyed having a conversation with you, and I appreciate you sharing so openly about
Absolutely.
your family and your homeschool experience. And I'm stoked to hear about your guys' upcoming trips and
Thank
how
you.
they go.
Thank you. Well, and to remind
So
your listeners, remember, learning is a change in behavior as a result of experience. That's what we learned in flight
yes,
school. So, anytime you have an opportunity to learn something and you take that forward with you, like I said, it's a change in behavior as a result of experience. So, keep on learning, and every day, every aspect of life, no matter where you are, and no matter what learning looks like for you.
I love that. Thank you once again, Robin. And to my audience, thank you guys for listening. If you stuck with me this long, you know all the things to do, right? Like, comment, subscribe, leave a review, do all of the things. If you've got any questions for me, for Robin, for any of my other previous guests, shoot me an email, exhsclub@gmail.com. And until next time, we'll see ya. Peace.